Welcome back to the show today. I want to share some thoughts with you on building the mass, M-A-S-S. I think that much stuff, that's the only adjective I have, it happens for us in ways that we could have never imagined. Have you heard of the story about a pastor who had a kitten that climbed up in a tree in his backyard, and then the kitten was too afraid to come down? The pastor coaxed and offered warm milk, but the kitty would not come down, so the tree was not sturdy enough to climb. So the pastor decided that if he would tie a rope to his car and drove away, then the tree would bend down and he could then reach up and get the kitten. That's what he did, all the while checking his progress in the car. He then figured if he was just a little bit farther, that the tree would then be bent sufficiently for him to reach the little kitten. But as he moved the car a little further, the rope broke and the tree went bong and the kitten instantly sailed through the air out of sight. The pastor felt terrible. He walked all over the neighborhood asking people if they'd seen the little kitten. No, nobody had seen a stray kitten, so he prayed, "Oh God, I just commit this kitten to your keeping," and he went about his business. A few days later, he was at the grocery store and met one of his church members, and he happened to look into her shopping cart, and it was amazing to see cat food. And this woman was a cat hater. I mean, she really hated cats, and everybody knew it. So he asked her, "Why are you buying cat food when you hate cats so much?" She replied, "You won't believe this," and then told him how her little girl had been begging her for a cat, but she kept refusing. Then a few days before, the child had begged again, so the mom finally told the little girl, "Well, if God wants to give you a cat, I'll let you keep it." So she continued, "I watched my little child go out into the backyard and get down on her knees and pray, and really, Pastor, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, a kitten suddenly came flying out of the clear blue sky and landed right in front of her." Silly story. I personally doubt if it's true, but sometimes stuff happens that will blow your mind. Today I want to talk about building mass in your life. There's a text, ancient text that says, at least a paraphrase of it says this, that if you fall to pieces in a crisis, there wasn't much to you in the first place. Think about that a minute, man. Now, I'm not suggesting that, multiple crises would not maybe give you pause or give you a reason to want to throw in the towel. But I'm suggesting that maybe one event is not something for us to give up and quit. Today, again, I'm talking about building mass. I'm talking about building bulk in your life. And sometimes when you want to build bulk in your life, it is not fun. In the Bible, in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, a paraphrase of this text that was written by a gentleman by the name of Eugene Peterson. He says, "You've all been to the stadium and seen the athletes race. Everyone runs, one wins. Run to win, all athletes train hard. They do it for a gold medal that tarnishes and fades. You're after one that's gold eternally," this paraphrase says. He says, "I don't know about you, but I'm running hard for the finish line. I'm giving it everything I've got. No sloppy living for me. I'm staying alert and in top condition. I'm not going to get caught up napping and telling everyone else all about it, then I'm missing out on myself." And I think sometimes you and I have a tendency to look at other people who've made it big time and think that maybe they have these special genes, or they come from a family, or their parents had really great jobs and they paid for everything, or they were born with this level or this high IQ. When if you really read stories about these people, most of these people, that's not the case at all. T.S. Eliot said, "If you aren't in over your head, how do you know how tall you are?" Again, if you aren't in over your head, how do you know how tall you are? There's people I know that do extraordinary things just to see how far they can push themselves. If you go to the gyms, some of the bodybuilding gyms, people who You go there at certain times in the morning. I've been at the gym at 5:30 in the morning. I've been at the gym at 12:30 in the afternoon. I've been at the gym at 6:30 at night. And there are a few people in there at all hours that, huge guys, I mean, huge. But it doesn't happen by themselves. They don't, I thought for a long time that certain people were born that it would be easier for them to get in shape and to bulk up. But that is not, honestly, I could be wrong, but that's generally speaking not the case. That they work harder than anybody else or most of everybody else in order to get the bulk that they really are looking for. So I'm wondering if you and I look at ourselves in the mirror and say, or ask ourselves sometimes, could you have tried harder? Could I have tried harder? Could I have done more? Building one's strength doesn't happen alone. It comes through consistent resistance. Think about that a minute. Your strength comes from consistent resistance. Some of us don't like resistance. Some of us don't like pain. Some of us don't like pushing ourselves to the point when, you do things that are not comfortable. I think you've been there, and I've certainly been there more times than not. Susie Kasem writes, the true test of a warrior is how your stance holds up after any circumstance. Meaning, after the stormiest weather, a true warrior will still reflect the brilliant rays of the magnificent sun through both his or her eyes. You may get hit by sudden lightning or take severe beatings from the cruel wind, but you will always get back up and stand strong on your feet again. She says to soak in the sunlight, soak it in, and stand strong on your feet again, even through the most merciless hail time and time again. You know how hard that is to do when you get knocked down over and over again, and the temptation is to stay down, or maybe the temptation is to say, maybe this is a sign that I don't need to be getting back up again. I'm telling you, I'm the first one to tell you that there are most days that you just don't feel like getting up and going again. And I've had those days, I will have those days, and I think you can relate that you've had those days and will have those days too. In the Bible, St. Paul had gone through some really crazy stuff. He was at one point I'll use the term loosely, he was a terrorist against this new religion called Christianity. And then he became one of the biggest fans of Christianity. It's a long story behind that. But one paraphrase of this text in 2 Corinthians, it says he says that we're afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven into despair. He said, persecuted, but not forsaken, and struck down, but not destroyed. You know how hard it is to keep going when it seems like people are kicking you down every time you try to stand up again? For me, my biggest salvation is probably the wrong word, but my biggest inspiration is reading about people who've gone through some very difficult times and they kept getting back up again and moving forward. Now, I'm not telling you that I can master all that every hour of every day, because I'm not there. I'll be quite frank with you. I'm not there. There's many days that, especially these days, that I don't want to keep going. So I make a decision that in this hour, I'm going to keep going. In the next hour, I'll keep going. I wonder if sometimes you have to drill it down to such a point that you can't even imagine getting through the week, but maybe you can imagine getting through the day or through the hour or maybe the next 10 minutes. If that's what it takes, do it. Because sometimes that's all we have to give. That's the amount of energy that we have at the time. Orison Swett Marden lived in the 1800s, and he is one of my favorite authors. And he wrote books primarily to men. In that culture, it's a long story behind that comment, but he wrote books primarily to men. He wrote this book called Pushing to the Front, and it was published in 1894. He said this. He said, "Wanted, a man who will not lose his individuality in a crowd, a man who has the courage of his convictions, who is not afraid to say no, though all the world say yes." He went on to say in another part of the book, he says, "No man can be ideally successful until he has found his place. Like a locomotive, he is strong on the track, but weak somewhere else." He goes on to say, "Success is not measured by what you accomplish, but by the opposition, listen, you have encountered and the courage with which you have maintained the struggle against overwhelming odds. How many times haven't you been tempted to just stop before you got where you were going? Let me ask it again. How many times haven't you stopped before you got where you were going because you got tired? I did. I mean, I've stopped like dozens of times. I don't want to say hundreds, I hope not, but at least dozens of times. On the Australian coat of arms is a picture of an emu and a kangaroo. These animals were chosen because they share a characteristic that appealed to their forefathers. Both the emu and the kangaroo can move only forward, not back, the story says. The emu's three-toed foot causes it to fall if it tries to go backwards, and the kangaroo is prevented from moving in reverse by its large tail. I wonder if maybe humanity, I wonder if human beings, certainly silly to think about that, but you and I are in charge of if we're going to move backwards or to move forwards. I'm not suggesting to you at all today that it's easy. In fact, it's really hard. Really hard. Is it possible? Yes. Is it probable? I don't know. But it is possible. Sometimes you and I have to think about progressively overloading what you think you can do. I've shared this before on the show that there's days that I don't want to go to the gym. And then I leverage the journeys of other people to give me the courage to do the things in this story at the gym that I didn't think I would do. I mean, there's people that I've met at the gym that are 6 inches shorter than me that lift more than I do. Well, how's that possible? Well, if it's possible for them, they're smaller than me, weigh 20, 30, 40 pounds less than me, then the only thing that's stopping me from doing it is right here. So I wonder if you, maybe not at the gym, maybe not one who works out, but maybe you look at your own struggles and you think, well, I can't accomplish this, but then you start looking around at other people, purposely looking around, saying, you know what, if this one can do it, and that one can do it, and that one can do it, then maybe I can do it too. I'm asking you to build your mass by paying attention to what's going on around you and learning from people who've been there and done that, and not trying to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to reinvent the wheel to get someplace where you really want to go. Genesis 32 in the Old Testament, it talks about Jacob, who he got in a wrestling match, and he would not let go until he got what he wanted. I wonder how many of us have let go of opportunities before the opportunity had enough time to develop to get you something that you were really looking for and hoping for. I know I've done it. I've walked away from opportunities because I didn't want to invest or didn't hold on long enough for it to blossom. Or in a silly example, if I planted a flower and I watered it and it didn't grow fast enough. I'm sure that maybe happened to you in other areas of your life. You look around and you say, man, this isn't happening fast enough, so it must not be for me. But then there's other people who've doing the exact same thing. They held on, they waited, they nurtured, they fertilized, they did all the right things, and then eventually they started to see some sort of return on their investment. Sometimes it doesn't happen quickly. Sometimes it takes a lifetime. Sometimes it takes decades for stuff to start showing up. But there's so many people that stop and start. As Jim Rohn talked about it years ago, he said there's so many people that build a lot of foundations, but they don't stick around long enough to build the house. So you have a starting point here, and then they start something else here, and they start something else here, and they come back here and do something else, and they create something over there, and the next zip code, and the next town, but they never complete anything. So they're now 85 years old, ready to die, and there's a bunch of foundations, and nothing's completed. I think you've done it, and I know I've done it. It's half-finished projects. You've got them all over your life. I got a few half-finished projects because I got tired of the journey. I got tired of the work. So I thought, we'll bag that idea. We'll start on another idea. I'm asking you, if you want to build mass in your life, you need to be more consistent. And consistency comes with a price. It does. There's an investment philosophy called dollar cost averaging. I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of it, but the foundation of that understanding is consistency. That if you consistently do the right things day in and day out, then the return is going to be so much greater if you do that versus looking for opportunities that may or may not be real, but that consistent steps, these consistent projects that you do, completing a project to the end before you start another one, will enable you to get so much farther ahead in life and frankly learn from the best of the best. The New Testament, talks about a variety of things, as you know, and there was a story that two brothers came to Jesus, and they said, Jesus, we want to be my paraphrase, your first and second command when you get into your kingdom, when you become this all-powerful king. And the summary of the story is that Jesus looked at them and says, look, there's a price to pay in order to have those roles. Are you willing to pay the price? And I really believe that some in society want the rewards of great things, but they don't want to pay the price to achieve the great things that they are trying to achieve. I'm not sure if that makes any sense. In other words, they want the dessert before they eat the meal. And I wonder if you've been there. I know I've been there before. I look at people who've succeeded, and I can't imagine that it was difficult for them, when in fact it was agonizingly difficult for them. But maybe they didn't publicize that. Maybe they don't share that. Until you purposely dig into their lives, you can see, man, they went through more hell than you and I could ever consider. But they didn't give up in the middle of it. And that's so much easier said than done. I'll be the first to tell you. Way easier said than done. Certainly there's lots of stories of people that believe that life was easy for some. We see people that look at people and think that maybe they were born with this certain like intelligence gene, or maybe they looked at people that seem to have achieved certain things in their life easily versus a difficult way. So let me just share a quick story. One day, dull and exhausted by the illness and burdens of this peasant life, this guy came to a very wise man. He sat in front of this wise man, and he sat for a long time, and he gave him a heartfelt smile, and the peasant breathed out a heavy sigh of mourning. He was so upset. He began complaining about his life, that he had, hard burden, hard difficulty, and he hadn't seen a bright day at all. So it's like, one problem falls, and then there's another one that pops up, and he's like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can keep going. So he said, life is twisted me into contortions of emotions, and so later he began blaming all his relatives and that they were guilty of all his misfortunes, and that's why circumstances didn't turn out right for him, the story says. So the wise man, he listened to him in silence, and when the peasant once again inquired of the wise man why it was so unfair, what should he do and how could he find peace? So the wise man got up from his seat and invited the peasant to follow him. They came out of the hut and went by the lakeside, which was not far away and where from time to time they would, go fishing and maybe trot past and try to catch some fish. So the wise man led the peasant to the lakeside and said to him, do you see the smoothness of the lake? The depths of the lake are full with life. There are fishes that always stay in the water, and if suddenly the lake got polluted, they couldn't see further than their own nose. They would hardly recognize where the source of the pollution was, and they would just keep swimming in circles. And there are also fishes that got wings, and they can rise above the water of the lake, looking at them from maybe the height of their own flight. So this is my advice. Instead of complaining about your life, he says, come to this lakeside from time to time and watch the flying fishes and try to understand what I'm trying to say to you. What I'm suggesting to you in this moment is it is very difficult for you and I to see above our situation because we're in the situation. We're engulfed in the situation. We are overwhelmed with the situation. We are stressed by the situation. But if we can just elevate ourselves just a little tiny bit above the situation, we could potentially see things that we aren't able to see in the situation. I'm not telling you it's easy. I am guarantee you telling it's not easy because I have a very hard time seeing above the situation every hour of every day. But this story suggests to me that there might be just a bit of wisdom in there, that if we could pull ourselves out of the situation, above the situation, just a tiny bit, we can see some things maybe that we haven't seen before. Sherry Proskine writes, many years ago, a man was sailing from Ireland to England, and as the ship entered the harbor in the evening, all that could be seen was a confusing array of lights. He wondered how the captain could cope to navigate into the harbor safely, with such confusion, so he asked him. So the captain took him up on the bridge and said, it's really, really very simple. I'll show you how. Do you see that big light over to the left? And do you see that other big light over there to the right? And now do you see that outstanding light farther still, way far away? Well, keep your eyes on those three lights and see what happens. As the man watched, the big outer light on the left gradually moved in until it coincided with the middle one. Then as the ship turned, the light gradually merged into the third light. There now, said the captain. All I have to do is to see that those three big lights become one. Then I go straight forward. There's a couple lessons in this story. One lesson for me, one takeaway for me, and maybe for you, is that there are captains, in quotes, around us every day. Maybe they're people that are less educated than us. Maybe they are a little abrasive on the outside, but maybe they have been on the boat for longer than you, and they understand how to get where they need to get and aren't distracted by what seems to be impossible odds. And I wonder if you and I can really understand that there might be the person in the next table to you at work, or maybe it's a next door neighbor, or maybe the person's right in your own home that you didn't think had some wisdom that could teach you some things. I'm suggesting to you that maybe you need to start paying attention to the people around you that could teach you a thing or two. The great basketball star Michael Jordan said, obstacles don't have to stop you. If you run into a wall, don't turn around and give up. Figure out how to climb it, go through it, or work around it. You and I both, we run into situations in our lives when we think that the difficulty is a sign for us to stop. Let me say it again. You and I go through difficulties in our life, and we view those difficulties, not all, but some, as a sign that we should stop and not go farther. When in fact, it's just maybe a detour to see how serious you are to get around it, or to get under it, or to maybe put a hole through it. How hungry are you? How serious are you? There's times when you and I go through life and we look at other people and we think that, you know what, there's no way that I could do what they've done. But then if you really look at the outline of their life, if you take the time, I'm asking you today to invest the time to study people who've made it big time. Because if you study the people that have made it big time, you'll learn that they're no better, no worse than you, no smarter than you. They just chose to take a journey. They chose to pay a price that maybe you and I aren't willing to pay. So then maybe you could have some of the same things that they have if you pay the same price that they paid. This is not rocket science. So if you really want to build your mass, if you really want to, build a life that is pretty extraordinary, then there's lessons all around you, isn't it? There's lessons not only on TV, but there's lessons of people. There's people that are all around you that can teach you some things that will shorten that learning curve quite a bit. That's why in our insurance agency that I'm determined to lessen the learning curve of people that work with us. Because why would I hold that information back? I want them to succeed. So if I want them to succeed, then what should I do? I should lessen the learning curve. I should take them up on top of the boat and align those lights so that they don't have to wreck. They don't have to have a difficult time. You need to surround yourself with people who will do that for you. And guess what? You need to do that for people around you too. Because you have experiences, you have journeys, you've come through difficulties, you've paid the price that's in some form, that you've learned some lessons, that there's some other people around you that can learn from you. So get up on your boat and align the lights for people that are interested in learning more. You can't tell people, something that they don't want to hear. There's people that there's a lot of people out there who don't know that they don't know. There's nothing you can do with these people. But people who know that they don't know and they want to know, those are the people that you and I can coach. So when you decide to build your mass, think about what you can do for other people too. Because what you go through in life is not accidental most of the time. Most of the journey that you've been through in your life can be leveraged for other people to help them build mass, to help them build a life that they've only imagined. I really appreciate you watching the show today, and I hope one or two items I've shared here today will help you and people also in your life. Thanks for watching.